Michael Taylor is a British man who gained notoriety for committing a brutal and shocking murder in the early 1970s. His case was widely covered by the media at the time and has since become one of the most infamous crimes in British history. Taylor was born in the small town of Littleborough, Lancashire in 1949. As a young man, he was known to be volatile and quick-tempered, often getting into fights and arguments with those around him. Despite his violent tendencies, he managed to hold down a series of jobs over the years, working in construction and as a laborer. In 1974, Taylor was living in a small village in Worcestershire with his wife, Christine, and their 5 children. That year, a local man named Marie West was found murdered in her home, and Taylor quickly became a suspect in the crime. West was a 22-year-old woman who lived alone in a small bungalow on the outskirts of the village. On the night of her murder, she had been out with friends at a local pub, but she left early, saying that she needed to get home to check on her cat. She was never seen alive again. A few days later, a neighbor noticed a foul smell coming from West's house and called the police. When officers arrived, they found West's body in the living room. She had been brutally beaten and stabbed multiple times, and her body had been left to rot in her house for several days before it was discovered. Police launched a massive investigation into the murder, and they quickly honed in on Taylor as a suspect. He had been seen in the area around the time of the murder, and he had a history of violent behavior. Taylor was arrested and questioned by police, but he denied any involvement in the crime. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Taylor maintained his innocence, insisting that he had no memory of the night of the murder. It was at this point that the case took a bizarre turn, as Taylor and those around him began to claim that he was possessed by a demon. Taylor's family, friends, and supporters argued that he had been taken over by an evil spirit that had caused him to commit the murder. They claimed that he had undergone a demonic possession, during which he was no longer in control of his actions. As word of Taylor's supposed possession spread, the case began to attract widespread attention. Many people were fascinated by the idea of a real-life exorcism, and the story quickly became one of the most talked-about news items of the year. In an attempt to help Taylor, his family turned to a local Anglican priest named Father Peter Vincent. Vincent was known for his interest in the supernatural, and he believed that Taylor was indeed possessed by a demon. He performed an exorcism on Taylor in the hopes of driving out the evil spirit. The exorcism was a long and grueling process, lasting for several days. Taylor was restrained during the procedure, as he thrashed and convulsed on the floor. Vincent and several other priests prayed over him, attempting to force the demon out of his body. The exorcism ultimately proved unsuccessful, as Taylor continued to maintain his innocence and denied any knowledge of the murder. He was eventually found guilty of the crime and sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 20 years to be served before he would be eligible for parole. At his trial, the prosecution argued that Taylor had killed West in a fit of rage. They presented evidence that he had a history of violence, including several incidents in which he had attacked and injured people. They also pointed to the brutal nature of the murder, suggesting that it was a crime of passion committed by a man with a violent temperament. Taylor denied the charges against him, but the jury found him guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 20 years to be served before he would be eligible for parole. After his conviction, Taylor was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 20 years to be served before he would be eligible for parole. He was sent to HMP Wakefield, a high-security prison in West Yorkshire, where he quickly gained a reputation as a dangerous and unpredictable inmate. In 1978, just 4 years into his sentence, Taylor made headlines again when he and another inmate, Paul Oldfield, escaped from Wakefield Prison. The two men managed to evade police for several days before they were eventually caught and returned to custody. Over the years, Taylor's behavior in prison continued to be erratic and violent. He was known to attack other inmates and staff members, and he was frequently placed in solitary confinement as a result. In the early 1990s, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and he was moved to a secure hospital for treatment. Despite his mental health issues, Taylor remained in custody for decades, and he was repeatedly denied parole over the years. In 2012, after serving nearly 38 years behind bars, he was finally released from prison on compassionate grounds due to his failing health. Today, Michael Taylor is in his 70s and living in a care home in the UK. His case remains one of the most infamous in British criminal history, and it continues to fascinate true crime enthusiasts around the world.